Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to bring you my list that's going to be taken on lane later this week. For those of you tuning in real quick just to see what the camera and audio quality is, I'm going to tell you, we tried 2 cameras. Sorry, didn't work. Cool. Tried to mess with the settings. Been working on that the last 2 weeks. Couldn't do it. Short story is, out with those cameras, back to the old. Back to the old for a while. We're not going to mess with that for a bit. However, we did find a 4 microphone set, which is something that we've been looking for that we want to test out next week. The good thing is because I'm doing the old video equipment, we'll be able to catch it relatively quickly if it's really not working and really sounds bad, and we'll switch back to the microphone. So bear with us. There is one more audio test that we're going to mess with to see if we can't do a 4 microphone set, because if I can, and we could, that would be able to allow us to do some other cool things here on the channel, maybe some more 2v2 matchups. Needless to say, after going and putting everything and seeing it and seeing how terrible all the video came out, it really bummed me, and I felt like I didn't do Tyranids enough justice. That list specifically. I had mentioned at the end that I did want to try the list into something real, and I figured this was the best time to do this, to give the Tyranids a second chance. Exact same list. I know, I've been running the same Grey Knight list, and now similar Tyranid list, but I feel like getting ready for a GT, I got to start playing some lists a little more consistently to see what I really like to take into a GT. And yes, I am considering the Tyranid list. Yes, it is a ton of painting, and I'm looking at that, and I know. I realize what I'm telling myself I'm about to sign up for, and it involves 40 Hormagots in there. However, I did really have a lot of fun playing this army. It felt like Tyranids, and it felt like good Tyranids, especially in the secondary game, where I haven't done really anything with fixed this edition, and this army plays fixed really well. And I think that's something that will catch a lot of people off guard who are not used to a Tyranid fixed army. And at the same time, too, although it is kind of a common blend of what most Tyranid armies kind of shelter towards fixed, it's still very hard to stop with some of the mechanics that are involved in the army. So that being said, let's talk about the invasion fleet that I'll be bringing against Lane today, later this week. All right, here it is, Tyranid invasion fleet. So the invasion fleet, I get to select one ability at the beginning of the game. And the one I'm going to be taking is sustained going into infantry, because Lane is going to be playing the new Custodes detachment that has a bunch of buffs for infantry and units being by themselves. So the other options are lethal into monster and vehicles, or precision on 6s to wound. And that's the ability I pick at the beginning of the game, and all my Tyranid units get that, shooting and combat. So we'll go with sustained, because we're going into infantry. First things we're going to start off with is our Hive Tyrant. So Hive Tyrant is a very pivotal piece. He's 2 up, 4 up, toughness 10, 10 wounds, and he brings 2 very powerful abilities. One is an aura effect that gives lethal and assault to ranged weapons within 6 inches of him, as well as being able to reduce a cost of a stratagem used on a unit within range of him. Because he is a monster and can't join a unit, his CP reduction is a aura, which is super cool. Now, he is toughness 10 with 10 wounds. I did give him an enhancement that allows him to reroll 1 hit, wound, damage, save, advance, or charge per turn. So that's your turn and my turn. So it allows him to be a little more defensive and a little bit more accurate, I guess, in some ways. Accurate on the charge, accurate where you need him. But if he gets hit by a lot of lethal, especially coming off of Space Marine units, he can get squishy. Going into Custodes, my biggest fear with him and his brother is the Melta bikes, because if those bikes are off by themselves and they're not within 6 inches of another friendly unit, they get +1 to hit and wound. So that means those Melta missiles coming into a Tyrant can burn him out really quickly. So I got to watch and try and take care of those quick. A big thing you're going to hear me say a lot is how concerned I am with the bikes that come out of there. So just to talk about them real quick. Fast-moving bikes that can, if they're 6 inches away from a friendly unit, are going to get +1 to hit and +1 to wound with multi-damage. Basically, Melta missiles is what they get called at going into these guys. As I mentioned, his brother, we are bringing the Swarm Lord. Swarm Lord's also going to kind of want to be on the front line because he's our Vect, increasing stratagem cost by 1 CP. And he also, just by living, gives us a command point, which makes it tough because you want him kind of up there towards the fray, given that 12-inch aura to make CP cost 1 more for our enemy. But you also don't really want to lose him because he's going to be your CP generation, playing fixed secondaries. Now, he is kind of a beast in combat, so he can smack, what with his twin-linked weapons and all, but you still got to watch for that same thing. Lethal hit Space Marine Oath the moment he goes away. And as we mentioned before, Custode bikes. Custode bikes can burn him out and take away my CP regen very, very easily. Now, moving into some of our damage dealers, some of our ranged. Number 1 we have is a Tyrannofex. So the Tyrannofex, he's big, he's tanky, coming in with toughness 12, 16 wounds, and a 2-up save. He's able to shrug off 1 failed save per turn, 1 damage result, and reduce it to 0. And he has a long-range beat stick of a gun, hitting on 3s, 48-inch range, strength 18, AP 4, flat, D6 plus, I'm sorry, not flat, D6 plus 6 damage. This guy could wreck things, but going into a heavy infantry matchup, he may not be as valuable. His biggest point could be if he can take 2 bikes out of the air in a single round of shooting. But he is big and bulky, so he's good to keep on that back objective to kind of hold for OC purposes, so that probably is going to be a lot of his role, just to be big and chunky. Now, moving up the field and hopefully being able to clean up some Custodes is going to be this team of 2 Carnifexes and Old One-Eye. I love this unit. Someone mentioned using Death Spitters for strength 7 AP2 1 damage on the sustained. It's like 24 shots. And I see that. That's not bad, but I still do like this flat 3 damage, especially going into Marine meta. And with the Custodes, that's even more efficient because there was a lot of 3 wound models that they have. So these guys are able to pick up straight Custode guard with a hit, D3 shots blast. So any of the 6-man squads, these guys are going to get +1 shot into them. So it'll be D3 +1 per Carnifex. Hitting on 3s, re-rolling, and then you have the sustained possibility. Being able to proc sustained for shooting into infantry. Finally, going into that flat 3 damage is going to be very, very nice. The strike 9, being able to wound on 3s. These guys can actually hurt Custodes pretty bad, some of the infantry out there. Now, again, these guys are susceptible to the bikes and can get melted if the bikes decide to come after them. Positive thing, though, is these guys do have a pretty good overwatch with being able to do reroll, having Old One-Eye there, and having sustained. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's mounted. They don't get it into them. So it wouldn't have sustained, but so that hurts. But they still have a pretty decent overwatch going into infantry. Just remember that part. That's kind of where we're at for it. One of the big things is I don't know exactly how many bike squads Lane's going to take. I don't know how many bike squads most lists are going to take. So it's going to come down to a big question of that. I definitely, if I can get a hold of those things, I'm going to tear them off the table real fast. And a unit that might be able to do that is my Zoanthrope. The Zoanthrope are going to be hitting on 2s because they're led by a Neurotyrant. And they have the guns that can do it. They have the guns that if they can get line of sight and range onto a squad of bikes, they can pick them up. Now, granted, bikes are still going to have that 4-up invuln, but each shot that goes through can do the damage to pick up a bike. It is based on a dice roll, but at least the damage potential is there. On top of it, they give off a 6-up invuln, which is going to be very big for a lot of my army because the Custodes are going to love to go into like Hormagaunts and Gargoyles and such and be able to just slap them off the table, giving them no save at all. So giving them a 6-up invuln can slow down some of the attack process because even though the guys do have a lot of attacks, there isn't a lot of guys. So the more we keep alive and the more little bit of damage we can do, it's all going to add up over time. So 6-up invuln is really nice. The Neurotyrant also gives 2 units synapsis within 18 inches, which is going to also help with those 2 Hormagaunt blobs. Next up is the Psychophage. I like this guy. He's very cheap. He's a monster, so he gets those benefits. He's got a 5-up Feel No Pain and a 3-up save. 6-up Feel No Pain is his aura, which again, with the Hormagaunts, giving them a 6-up invuln and 6-up Feel No Pain makes him really resilient. And for some silly reason, he's anti-psyker. So when he goes and can get into a fight with a psyker, or a unit led by a psyker, he's got anti-psyker in there. So it's just pretty cool, little extra. I've seen some Librarius armies that have a 5-man with a librarian in there. So to be able to have him chew on that squad a little bit more because they have a character is kind of funny. And units that just take an Inquisitor, that's a psyker too. But more or less, he's there for the 6-up, feel no pain. And then a unit that can also wander off and help me with my secondaries being engaged and behind enemy lines. Now, we've talked about them a bit, so let's go over into them. 40 Hormagaunts. So I have two 20-man bricks of Hormagaunts. These guys can get a 6-up invuln and a 6-up feel no pain, which makes it obnoxious when they start stopping attacks and just reducing how much damage goes through because of you happen to roll a 6 when you have 2 ways to roll it on Storm Bolters, and the stuff that you hope would clear these squads quickly. These guys can advance and charge. They have a 10-inch move, and they're going to get that same sustain buff, and they have quite a few attacks. On top of that, these guys are a great target when the Hive Turret's nearby or not to be able to get the critical 5-ups. Great on these guys. Amazing when that one charge, because you just get one charge with these guys and then they go away, because then they're away from everything and they die. But man, when you get that one charge, they can hit something really hard. And then on top of it, they're good for Endless Multitude, where for 1 command point, you could put D3 plus 3 models back in 2 Endless Multitude units, which both of these units are. So that can be a good point to be able to just heal a couple guys if they're sitting in the open, to allow them to maybe heal onto an objective, or just having enough guys to be able to spread out and cover a zone and take some board presence after, if there's nothing else for them to do, especially for behind enemy lines and engage in all front. And since they're very quick, they're also units that can add to those totals and getting to those spots. So now we're going into the secondary. So first we'll talk about the Lictor. Lictor is awesome. Lane loves them. You'll hear all about it. So Lictor has Infiltrate, Stealth, Fight First, and Lone Operative. So for Lone Operative and Stealth, he's defensive and shooting. If you charge him, he fights first. And he has precision on all of his attacks. And if he happens to kill a character, I gain a command point. So it's another way to generate command points if the Swarm Lord does die. And yes, it's relevant because it does happen, because there are small characters that are attached to units like 5-mans and stuff like that exists in the current meta. And when he goes in there, and if the only thing he does when he's in combat with that squad is take out the character, that's worth it. And honestly, a lot of things like Marines, he's really good into like 5-man Marine squads because of that 2 damage. So he's pretty awesome. And fight first. I mean, fight first right there. Charge me, I still punch you first. So good. Next up, the Raveners. So Raveners are a unit that can up down. I chose to give these guys armor instead of the shooting attack. I figured it's kind of better for their general role. So if at worst they're in cover, that can really help them be a little defensive so I don't lose them all, because as long as I have one guy alive, they can do a lot. Behind enemy lines and engage on all fronts, it's really awesome to be able to have a unit that can just pick up and land anywhere on the field so it can clean up my game wherever it may be, so that I can score those secondaries continuously for the course of the game. And another thing that really helps me score secondaries continuously through the course of the game is the single Biovore. All right, so I got the real model, or the new model, because I realized before the game, I was like, man, mine looks really small. Oh, this thing is really big. Oh, it's on an 80mm base. Okay. So the Biovore exists for one reason. Its ability. It's toughness 6, 5 wound dude with a 3-up save. And he's got an artillery cannon, but we're not going to shoot it. Instead, we're going to use his ability that allows us, instead of shooting, to place a Spore Mine unit that consists of the number of models that are shooting with this ability. So since I'm firing 1, I create a single Spore Mine model unit that is a 25mm base and place it anywhere on the table 9 inches away from the enemy. Now, this unit is OC0, but it does count as a unit for engage on all fronts and behind enemy lines. So the Raveners will help protect this guy and keep him alive, because the more times I shoot him, the more units I put out there that can help me score those secondaries. And eventually it does get to a point where your opponent, if you're doing damage, your opponent's progressing with the game, that you theoretically can have 4 spore mines on the board, or at least 3 in all 4 table quadrants, including the biovore in your own. Yeah, it's silly, but it is a very unique way to be able to play this secondary for Tyranids, to be able to do what do you call it, the fixed secondaries. I don't think without the biovore, the Tyranid fixed secondary game would be as solid as it is. And then last up, we do have a squad of gargoyles, a 10-man squad. Gargoyles are I know a lot of people take them, a lot of people love them, and I can see why. This is a unit that you deep strike in. They could shoot and then move, normal move 6 inches. Or if you have to put them on the table, they move 12 inches. Their guns are assault. You advance with them. You can shoot and then move another 6 inches. So even when they land, they can still make it pretty much anywhere they want on the table. These guys are also very good for that secondary game, being able to land, fix engage on all fronts, and then in a later turn, fix engage on all fronts somewhere else, because we can put a spore somewhere. If we can't put a spore in our opponent's deployment zone and we need to get there from behind enemy lines, the gargoyles can cross that 9-inch threshold barrier because they're already on the field and put a spore mine where they were. So these guys are good for that. Obviously, they're very, very light. They're only toughness 3 and 6, 6 up save. So a gust of wind and they're going to explode. But if your opponent doesn't take down all 10, they are an endless multitude unit. So they could be the second target for that stratagem, or a only target if need be, and adding models back to the unit. On top of the fact that it kind of, in some scenarios, you might go, you know what? I'm fine. I have 1 model here. I'm going to put this 1 model in your zone and be engaged on all fronts. And that's the only thing that would fit in that area, in that little spot. All right, so that's the list. That's what I'm going to be bringing. This is the exact same list that I played 2 weeks ago, and I want to get a good video with it on camera and really show, because I had a lot of fun with this. I am seriously considering this for the GT. I really did like this a lot. So going into these new Custodes that are super, super brutal will be a good test. I'm realistic, but I'm concerned about the bikes a lot. And even if Lane doesn't bring a heavy amount of them, that's going to be one thing I want to discuss with him and see what it is, where it falls, what the point cost is, and other stratagems and abilities. And is it something that's worth taking 3 units? Because in a lot of things, especially with the vehicle heavy meta, those guys can just wreck things very, very quickly. Those bikes, they're very fast and they can get away from each other and just wreck things. And Venatari too can get away from stuff, deep striking, and wreck things. So I definitely wonder what that's going to mean for some stuff, and how, if I can hold out with that durability, because that's some vicious, vicious damage that's going to be coming through. So that's going to be a definite challenge. I do have a stratagem that gives me a feel no pain. It's a 6 up, but then if I'm in Synapsis, I can get a 5 up. So there is a way that if it's reduced amount of damage, I might be able to reduce it with that stratagem, and that's definitely going to be in my mind for the course of every turn of the game. Now, it's a good thing it can reduce CP as well as CP gain early, so I can try to stay on top of that and maybe outperform in this command point game and the stratagem game, and more or less focus on my secondaries. As long as I can keep pushing with my secondaries and keep scoring those points and get at least the 39, if I have to drop a behind enemy lines point in the early point of the game, like a 38, 39, then we can start to see how things go with the primary mission game. Because I'm going to have to push back. But at least in that case, I can push back against what he sends into me versus trying to push back into his entire army, including other things that might be walking. Now, if he some reason picks everything up and puts everything into my face, that's also a out I can play into with things like the Raveners and the Hormagaunts being able to get further into his zone and score points for me out of there. If I have to pass by some units and go after softer targets because I can get them, or less models because I can get them, as opposed to what might be right up in my face. Because a lot of that stuff, other than bikes, once it hits me, that's where it's going to be. Yes, Venatari can jump. They can jump around the field and all that stuff. Yes, they're also able to get to me too, but they're a little shorter range as far as their guns are concerned. So That's yeah. And actually, I think the way Lane runs his typically, they're more combat oriented, less shooting. They do shoot, but not. I think they're pistols. Pretty sure it's 12-inch range. All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see how it does. Not being pessimistic, I'm being realistic. It's going to be tough. But if I can get those zoanthrope on that squad of bikes, if he's taking just one, that's going to be a huge turning point. That's going to be where I need it at. Where some of the other things that they do hit hard, they hit at 2 damage. That's going to be stuff I'm hoping I can soak up a little bit and try to use the toughness and the wound counts of some of my monsters to zone that out and soak up that damage. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.